The United States and Iran have exchanged fire for an eighth consecutive day. This comes as 2 US soldiers were killed by an Iranian strike in Jordan. Jordanian media say the country's armed forces also shot down 3 Iranian missiles on Sunday. Iran also targeted US bases in Kuwait with a flurry of rockets over the weekend. Both Washington and Tehran have dismissed the memorandum of understanding signed between the US and Iran just over a month ago. All right, well, let's get some analysis now and speak with Mehrzad Boroujerdi, Iran and Middle Eastern politics expert at Missouri University of Science and Technology. Great to have you on DW News today. So Iran has targeted US partners in the Middle East, including Jordan, Kuwait and Bahrain. What does that tell us about Tehran's strategy?
Well, I think Tehran has started this strategy of trying to make sure that after the U.S. moved some of its, warplanes and ammunitions away from the Persian Gulf states to further places like Israel and Jordan, that they can demonstrate that they can still reach and touch American forces like they did in Jordan. Now, this is of course a risky enterprise, as we saw. It has created, produced casualties for the U.S. forces so far. And besides, some of the ports that are being attacked in Jordan are also very close to Israeli territory. So the chances of missiles, landing in Israel is also there. Iran has consciously tried not to, attract Israel into this war again. But, there is always a chance that this might happen as this conflict acquires more and more of a regional flavor.
All right. Now, one aspect of this crisis that we've spoken a lot about, of course, is the Strait of Hormuz. How far do you think Iran is willing to go in disrupting traffic through the strait, given the potential economic consequences for the world and for Iran itself?
Right. My sense is that the Iranians have decided that they need to draw a line in terms of the control over the Strait of Hormuz, not necessarily because of the significance of the strait in and of itself, but also because what this might contain and communicate regarding all the other outstanding issues between the two sides. The nuclear issue, support for regional forces, Iran's missiles, and so forth. So they are trying to draw a line in the sand, regardless of the economic cost. Look, the Iranian government had announced before this latest, round of warfare that the damage to its economy from previous rounds was over $270 billion. With the type of attacks that we have seen over the last 7 or 8 days, it's easily has gone to over $400 billion in terms of the cost, and yet the Iranians are thinking that they can absorb these costs and inflict damage on global economy and the regional states as a way of making sure that they get a better deal once the negotiation eventually resumes with the United States.
Now, I want to take you up there on the nuclear issue. Now, the US says it's targeting military infrastructure, but Iran has actually accused Washington of striking a nuclear site under construction. So how concerned should we be that the nuclear issue is moving to the center of this crisis?
Well, of course, the nuclear issue, as we all know, is even more contentious than the Strait of Hormuz, right? This particular nuclear site, Iran started building it some 3 years ago as a small light water reactor for electricity, generation. And right now, based on what we have heard from the International Agency for Nuclear Issues, IAEA, they are looking into this report of an attack on this one. What is troubling, if this is indeed the case, is that the gloves comes off, right, as a result of this thing. Iran has already experimented with attacking a water desalination plant in Kuwait. We know there are more than 50 of such installations in the region, provide all the drinking water for the Gulf states. And if we really see this intensification, of the targeting of military infrastructure in Iran, it's only safe to conclude that the Iranians are going to respond in kind as a way of, again, increasing the cost for the other side. Now, what is important to keep in mind here, in my view, is the fact that, frankly, I don't see a military solution to this issue. So imagine even if the United States manages to destroy all the Iran's coastal launchers. The fact of the matter is that Iranian missiles and drones have ranges above 1,000 kilometers, meaning that even if everything in the south of the country is destroyed, still they can be firing missiles from the other corners of the country.
Now, we only have about 30 seconds left, but considering that essentially the memorandum of understanding has effectively collapsed and we've got 8 consecutive days of direct military exchanges, do you have any hope of a diplomatic way out of this?
Well, the MOU was signed more than 30 days ago, and it was, flawly worded, and I think we are seeing the problems associated with that. But at the end of the day, as I said, since I do not see a military solution to this, there has to be a negotiation based on an MOU.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there, but really great to get your analysis today. Mirzad Boroujerdi, Iran and Middle Eastern politics expert at the Missouri University of Science and Technology. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let's get more from Rowena Binti Abdul Razak, lecturer in the history of the Middle East and Africa at SOAS University of London. Hello, Rowena. Welcome to the program. Take us back for a moment. Based on what usually happens when conflicts drag on in the Middle East, is Iran likely to emerge stronger through nationalism or more vulnerable, you think?
Thank you so much for having me on the program tonight, Eddie. It's a good question. In many ways, Iran is emerging quite strong domestically. Remember that this is a government that was facing severe legitimacy issues, especially even before the war in January and December. There were lots of protests. So the war has actually strengthened Iran in many ways, and it strengthened the position of the government. They are presenting a united front. They are able to use the war to strengthen themselves internally. So in this sense, the nationalistic aspect is very strong. Furthermore, with things like the Strait of Hormuz and gaining control and asserting control of the Strait of Hormuz, Iran has shown itself to be also quite strong regionally as well. So yes, definitely.
Right. I mean, Gulf states have spent years trying to improve ties with Iran. What impact is this war having on the progress that was made?
It's a good question, and naturally, it's going to affect regional relations. The Gulf houses U.S. bases, which is where lots of the attacks on Iran have been coming from. So, and Iran has been retaliating by hitting Gulf states, not just U.S. bases, but also other Gulf assets such as power plants and desalination plants as well. So we know that the Gulf have been hit hard. Having said that, there seems to be an indication that the region wants to maintain relations with Iran, such as Abbas Araghchi was just at in Qatar for the funeral of the emir. So these kind of indicates that there's strong desire to maintain relations. But of course, the war is going to put a lot of strain on the relationship because Iran has exposed Gulf vulnerabilities. It has exposed how the U.S. bases make the Gulf vulnerable as well. So, of course, it's going to be quite a lot of pressure on the relationship.
Right. And Iran, we know they've long relied on allied armed groups across the region. Are those relationships now becoming more valuable or more of a liability for Tehran looking ahead for possible peace later?
It's a good question, and we need to kind of think back to the early 2020s. I mean, the US and Israel have actually been reducing Iran's regional presence. As we know, back in 2020, they assassinated Qasem Soleimani, who's a very important IRGC leader in the region, in Syria. So we know that their regional presence has actually been quite reduced. So all of these relationships have also kind of reduced as well. I mean, we know that Hezbollah, Hamas all of the natural allies of Iran in the region have also been severely weakened over the last couple of months. So in a way, those relationships are no longer terribly important anymore, especially when we take into consideration Iran's important position in the region. It can very well stand on its own without its allies. But at the same time, having said that, it still relies on people like groups like the Houthis in Yemen, who can potentially stop and limit the traffic going through the Bab al-Mandeb Strait. So in many ways, I think Iran is still relying on some of its allies, but in many ways, a lot of its allies have already been quite weakened.
Right. So, well, the hope is that this war ends soon, right? And if that happens, what do you think the lasting consequence will be for the region?
It's quite unfortunate because this was a fairly stable region. So I think it has to it has to prove that it can then go back to being a stable region, especially for countries like the UAE and Qatar that prides itself as a stable area in the Middle East, which is known to be quite chaotic. So there's a lot of PR that it needs to do for its own countries. But actually, I think a lot of the consequences of the war we're not really seeing just yet. Things like food shortages is going to be a real problem, not just for the region, but for the wider world, like Europe, that relies on food that comes from Africa and Asia. And those countries rely on fertilizers that come from Iran. So I think we're still not seeing the full extent of the war on not just the regional economy, but the global economy as well.
Right. Quick one on this before you go. Who stands to gain the most from this conflict and who has the most to lose?
It's a good question. In a way, one would like to think that no one really gains from war. I mean, the people of the Gulf, people of Iran are suffering immensely. One would think that in some ways, the Iranian government has somewhat benefited because it's been able to kind of bring back some legitimacy to its domestic position. The United States probably wants to show that it's able to still maintain a regional power, but at the end of the day, they're both going to exhaust themselves. So in a way, in the long term, no one's really going to benefit from this.
Right. Rowena Binti Abdul Razak, lecturer in the history of the Middle East and Africa, SOAS, London. Thank you.
Thank you.